Good evening, everybody. Namaskar. I'm Pawan Narang, advocate. First of all, my gratitude to lecture series of law, Anu, Priyanka, Robbie, Sumit, Nitesh, Sanjeev, and Sumit. And I also thank my team and associates, Shyam Agarwal, Siddharth Handa, and Himanshu Sethi, for helping me in collating the data and coming up with all the record so as to come up with this webinar. Now, as far as today's topic is concerned, it is a subject which relates to us and is part of our daily life. However, as per our routine, it is deal with it every day. But in our professional career, we don't deal with such kind of a subject that often. What I am talking about is the press, which is part of our daily life by way of newspapers, television, magazines, news channels, online news content. These mediums are our source of news and what is happening around us, whether at local level, state level, national level, international level. Press technically or literally what we can say means establishment and persons who are connected with collating information, printing, publication, and distribution of printed material, be it newspaper, books, magazines, or pamphlets. Media other than press includes radio, TV, websites, or social media platform. Before I proceed with my main topic, let's go through the history of press and press laws, which have been there in India. It was in 1780, that for the first time an Indian newspaper was published by the name of Bengal Gazette in Serampur. It was during East India Company rule. And 1799 was the year when the first time regulations came in to control the newspapers by requiring their name of the printer, publisher, proprietor, and also submitting the material for pre-censorship. They were followed by various government orders and ordinances till 1835 when Metcalfe Act came into existence. After that, in 1860, came in Indian Penal Code, wherein various offenses related to speech and expression were included, and they affected the liberties of the press. They included obscenity and defamation, as punishable under 299 and 500 respectively. Subsequently, some more sections were also added, like sedition under 124A, it was added in 1870. Promoting enmity between different groups, section 153A came in 1898. Making outraging religious feelings, section 295A in 1927. And making imputations against national integration, section 153B in 1972. These were the laws which were affecting the publication, printing, and running of the press. Then in last century came in radio, and it became a medium, a very favorable medium of everybody to get news and instant information. However, in last decades, few decades, there has been a substantial reach has been achieved through digital and electronic media by way of news channels, web availability of web, social media platforms, which have now become an alternate and preferred means of gathering information. Because of the media coming into fore, various laws were created to control and regulate the media, which is known as print and electronic media. The laws which came in were Information Technology Act in 2000, Press Council Act came in 1978, Cable Television Network Regulation Act and rules came in 1994. Nowadays, it is the news channel and social media platforms, as I said, have become the preferred platforms to gather news, and dependence on these platforms have their own benefits and pitfalls, which I'll deal later on. However, now let's come back to the main topic. Democracy is the essence of system of government where the will of the people is supreme. It naturally follows that in democracy, the freedom of speech and expression is the basic right that is guaranteed to every citizen of the country. The main point here is that the right of the people to freedom of speech and expression is the cornerstone of healthy democracy. In the words of George Washington, if the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter. Freedom of expression in India is dealt in Part 3 of Constitution, which provides us freedom of speech under Article 19(1). It protects one of our most cherished freedom, which is speech and expression, under 19(1)(a), which says all citizens shall have a right to freedom of speech and expression. However, the most striking feature about this article 19(1)(a) is that unlike Article 14 and 21, which apply to persons, 19(1)(a) applies only to the citizens. Thereafter, though this right has been granted to us by the framers of the Constitution, but it was never an absolute right. 19(2), which was brought in, also imposed certain restrictions on the exercise of the said right in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India, security of state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency, morality in relation to contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to an offense. The restrictions which are there in Article 19(2) have their own history. In the draft constitution, this article, Article 19, came in as Article 13. And Clause 2, which imposed restrictions on the right to freedom, stated that nothing in the article, now it is very relevant over here, shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law relating to libel, slander, defamation, just market, sedition, or any other matter which offends the decency or morality or undermines the authority or foundation of the state. Detailed deliberations happened, discussions were there. Ultimately, what came in as 19(2), thereby certain things happened. Sedition was, just note it down, sedition was taken out and contempt of court was added. In the last line,
ये दिखती है, ये पढ़ा जाता है, यूं लगाओ,
Kajal,
नीचे रखो.
Kajal, kindly mute your.
Oh, sorry.
And in the last line, it said, undermines the authority or foundation of state, was changed to undermines the security of or tends to overthrow the state. So the article which was Article 19(2), which was adopted, stated, shall affect the operation of existing law in so far as it relates to or prevent the state from making any law relating to libel, slander, defamation, contempt of court, or any matter which offends against decency or morality, or undermines the security or tends to overthrow the state. This constitution was adopted in 1950. And in 1950 itself, few of the judgments of Supreme Court and couple of High Court judgments came in, wherein other than some of the state acts which used to deal with public order, Section 124A, which deals with sedition, and 153 IPC were held to be void as they were not covered under reasonable restrictions of 1902. The moment this thing happened, this prompted introduction of first constitutional amendment in 1951 itself, which was hotly debated and objected, but ultimately passed, wherein further restrictions were added to Article 19(2). Those were relation with foreign states, public order, incitement to offense. So now what happens? What we are concerned over here, public order came into one of the restrictions and incitement to offense. The reason behind this amendment, barely 1.5 years after adoption of Constitution, when this amendment was proposed by the then Law Minister, Dr. Ambedkar, he stated in the Parliament, the necessity has arisen out of certain judgments which have been delivered by Supreme Court as well as by provincial high courts. Further, he said, all these cases have resulted in the decision that they are void laws because they are inconsistent with the fundamental rights. The anxiety of Dr. Ambedkar stemmed from the fact that Apex Court has struck down various enactments, government orders passed by state legislature government that sought to prohibit circulation of certain newspapers on the ground that the material contained therein was likely to disturb public order. The judgments which came in 1950 were the celebrated Ramesh Thapar and Brij Bhushan by Supreme Court, wherein they held that since public order was not permissible head under 19(2) for imposing restrictions, therefore the orders enactments were liable to be struck down. Punjab High Court in Master Tara Singh's case, which involved validity of 124A and 153A, and in Amarnath Bali's case, which dealt with Section 4 of Indian Press Emergency Power Act, held that these sections were void as they were not covered under 19(2). So today, I think so for the last few years, sedition has become one of the favorite topics of discussion amongst various class of people. And it is being stated that why such an old section, a colonial section, is still being retained on the Indian Penal Code. But if we see this history, so whatever may be said about maintainability of Section 124A, but the fact is, it was we the people of India, what the preamble starts as we the people of India, in 1950 gave ourselves Article 19 by specifically dropping sedition from Clause 2, which was there in draft Constitution. But the moment these judgments came in whereby sedition was declared void, immediately after 1.5 years, brought in an amendment, a first amendment to the Constitution, and brought it back under the garb of public order after the case in the judgment of Master Tara Singh. Thereafter, by 16th Constitutional Amendment in 1963, the words sovereignty and integrity of India were added in 1902. So this is the history, how Article 19 and specifically Article 19(2) developed as part of the Constitution, bringing in restriction on freedom of speech of the citizens of India. I'll just start with, like to cite one of the judgments, recent judgments of Justice Nariman on the concept of right of freedom of speech and expression. In Shreya Singhal in 2015, he has stated, there are three concepts which are fundamental in understanding the reach of this most basic of human rights. The first is discussion, the second is advocacy, and the third is incitement. Mere discussion or advocacy of a particular cause, however unpopular, is at the heart of Article 19(1)(a). It is only when such discussion or advocacy reaches the level of incitement that Article 19(2) kicks in. Now, as far as press is concerned, neither the Constitution nor any other law specifically provides any special privileges to the press over and above the ordinary citizens. However, various judgments have been passed and it has been just 1 minute, there is some connection error. Hello, are you able to listen to me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Audible, na? Okay, fine, because I got a message that it has got disconnected somewhere.
Sir, earlier it got, but now it is okay, sir.
Achha, so for how many minutes I was off?
No, sir, not for a minute. It was just for some seconds, sir. It was a low connection.
Achha, okay, fine. Then it's okay. So I was on the issue of special privileges of press. Though there is no act, but some of the judgments have recognized the importance of press and media in furtherance of concept of democracy. For example, in Ramesh Thapar, the Supreme Court held that freedom of speech lay at the foundation of all the democratic organizations. Then came Sakal Papers in 1962, which said freedom of speech and expression of opinion is of paramount importance under a democratic constitution, which envisages changes in the composition of legislature and government and must be preserved.
Oh, sorry.
And then Justice Beg, in his concurring judgment, said that the freedom of speech of press is an arc of covenant of democracy because public criticism is essential to the working of the institutions. Then in 1966, Harijai also came in, wherein the same issue was decided and it was held. Then came Indian Express. So these are some of the relevant judgments which have time and again provided for privileges of the press, especially in Indian Express. It has been held. It is with view to checking such malpractices which interfere with free flow of information. Democratic constitutions all over the world have made provisions guaranteeing the freedom of speech and expression, laying down the limits of interference with it. It is therefore the primary duty of all national courts to uphold the said freedom and invalidate all laws or administrative actions which interfere with it, contrary to the constitutional mandate. Now, as far as we as lawyers are concerned, we have seen and dealt with, there are two sections which majorly affect the press and media. They are defamation and obscenity. Though these two heads require a separate webinar in itself. However, I'll deal with them in passing today. The latest judgment of Supreme Court on section 500, 499 and 500 is Subramaniam Swamy, wherein the entire concept of criminal defamation has been culled out. It is 2016 SCC 221. Here, I'll just mention one thing. Whenever we as a lawyer either file defamation case or defend defamation cases, certain things have to be kept in mind as to how you are going to prove that a person has been defamed in the eyes of the others. I'll just give you one example. In one of my matters, it was in 1997, MCD elections were held in Delhi. I think so it was 2 days prior to the election date and the day when it stops, that what you call the publicity has to be stopped. In the morning, in the newspaper, a news item came in that more than 447 or 487 candidates contesting these elections have criminal antecedents or cases against them. And some of the names of the candidates and the type of cases pending against them, those details were given. One of the candidates lost elections and filed a defamation, criminal defamation as well as civil defamation case against the newspaper. I dealt with the criminal aspect of it. And the best part was that the candidate who won the elections was also named in that news item. Be that may be, it came on record that he was not able to produce any independent witness who could come and say that it was this news item which affected his, or which resulted in his change of decision or change of preference. Though the trial court convicted both the company and the editor, we filed an appeal. In the appeal, the Learned Sessions Court allowed both the appeals. However, convicted the editor under a different head, that was section 171G of IPC, which deals with news published during elections. And it says any fake news published or false news published during election will be punishable with fine. This is one section where neither the punishment is provided nor the fine is quantified. In this case, the High Court is still, the revision is pending. So in such kind of matters where somebody's professional career is involved, the way the case was filed without any evidence or witnesses led to such kind of a situation. Now comes the other aspect. The other is obscenity, which is punished under 292. There also, if you'll see that section, it only provides for the punishment and it doesn't define obscenity. It merely says that it depends upon the prudent person, how he perceives the object. Now here also, in one of my cases, similar thing happened. There was an ad published of a Ayurvedic capsule, energy boosting capsule in the newspaper, wherein there was a tagline and a photograph of a couple. 4 advocates in one of the district courts in Haryana filed a complaint under 292. And the court summoned the printer, publisher, editor, and others in this case. When we appeared, the demand was give an apology. We said, sorry, we will contest the case. We will not give any apology. Arguments happened. The counsel realized all of them. that they are not going to win this case. So they conveniently withdrew the case. So these things have to be seen while filing the case, and these sections which are too technical in nature, we have to be very careful and see how to defend them. Now, other than these two, now let's come down to the main sections which I want to deal with today are sedition, which is 124A, 153A, 153B, 295A, and 505. These are some of those hot topics which are being dealt with media in recent times. Before I get on to those sections, I'll just quote one judgment of Supreme Court, which was in Ram Manohar Lohia case in 1966, wherein public order was defined. Because public order is heart of some of these offenses. It said, one has to imagine three concentric circles. Law and order represent the largest circle, within which is the next circle representing the public order, and the smallest circle represents the security of the state. It is then easy to see that an act which may affect law and order, but not public order, just as an act may affect public order, but not security of the state. By using the said expression, maintenance of law and order, these issues have to be seen whenever these sections are to be dealt with. Now let's come down to section 124A, which is law of sedition. Law of sedition was not there in the original Indian Penal Code, but was introduced in 1870. And the first case under sedition was J.C. Bose case in 1892, which is known, very famously known as Bangobasi case, wherein it was held, disaffection means a feeling contrary to affection, in other words, dislike or hatred. Disapprobation means simply disapproval. Lastly, it said, though no disturbance is brought about by his words or any feeling of disaffection, in fact, produced by them, but still, they convicted him and he lost the case. And the next case, which was very celebrated case, was Bal Gangadhar Tilak case in 1898, wherein again, it was said, specifically, I agree with Sir Komar Petharam in the Bangobasi case that disaffection means simply the absence of affection. It means hatred, enmity, dislike, hostility, contempt, and every form of ill will to the government. Disloyalty is perhaps the best general term comprehending every possible form of bad feeling to the government. Here also, a literal interpretation of section was adopted by the court, such that any speech sought to excite feelings of disaffection or ill will or disloyalty against the government of the day was punishable, regardless whether the speech intended to or was likely to incite violence or public disorder. Subsequently, in 1942, Federal Court dealt with another case, which was Nahindru Dutt Majumdar. Here, some progressive interpretation was done of 124A, and it came in for the first time. It was held that the gist of the offense was public disorder, and that the objective offense was not to appeal to the wounded vanity of government. However, the Privy Council, though rejected this case, disapproved this case in a subsequent judgment. Now, thereafter, what had happened was, as I have told you earlier, sedition was, though it was part of 13.2 in the draft, it was dropped when Article 19.2 came in. And thereafter, after the judgment of Master Tara Singh, public order was brought in, and this section came back into existence. I'll just go by one paragraph of Master Tara Singh's judgment, which is 1950, available on 1950 SEC online, Punjab, Haryana 113. It says, there can be no dispute that section 124A is a restriction on the freedom of speech and expression, which is guaranteed to all citizens by clause 1 of article 19 of the Constitution. The question is whether section is saved by clause 2 of 19. Further down they say, I think therefore that the conclusion must be that section 124A of the Penal Code has become void as contravening the right of freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by article 19 of the Constitution. This was actually the urgency which brought in the First Amendment, a kind of First Amendment which is totally opposite to the First Amendment of US Constitution, which in fact gave unrestricted speech, right of freedom of speech. And here, First Amendment curtailed the freedom of speech of its citizens. Thereafter, in 1962, the famous case, Kedarnath Singh case came in, which has upheld the constitutional validity of 124A and has settled the law based on the aspect that public order was added in Article 19.2. They held, if it is held in consonance with the views expressed by federal court, they used the analogy given in Nahindru Dutt Majumdar, that the gist of the offense of sedition is incitement to violence or tendency or intention to create public disorder by words spoken or written, which have the tendency or the effect of bringing the government established by law into hatred or contempt or creating disaffection in the sense of disloyalty to the state. In other words, bringing the law into line with the law of sedition in England, as was the intention of legislature when they introduced section 124 into the Indian Penal Code in 1870 as aforesaid. The law will be within the permissible limits laid down in clause 2 of article 19 of the Constitution. So it is in this case, we are directly concerned with the question how far the offense as defined under 124A is consistent with fundamental rights guaranteed by article 19(1) of Constitution, which is in these terms. Then further down they come and say, hey, hold, with reference to constitutionality of the article section 124 or section 505 of Indian Penal Code, as to how far they are consistent with the requirements of clause 2 of article 19, with particular reference to security of state and public order, this section, it must be noted, penalize any spoken or written words or signs or visible representation which have effect of bringing or which attempt to bring into hatred or contempt or excites or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government established by law. Now, what they have done basically is they have provided as to what are the parameters wherein you can bring in section 124 into play. Now, the expression the government established by law has to be distinguished from persons from time being engaged in carrying on administration. A clear-cut distinction was made between the government established by law and the persons for time being engaged in carrying on the administration. Government established by law is the visible symbol of the state. The very existence of the state will be in jeopardy if government established by law is subverted. Hence, the continued existence of government established by law is essential condition of stability of state. That is why sedition as an offense in 124A has been characterized comes under chapter 6 relating to offense against the state. Further down, they go on to say, similarly, comments, however strongly worded, expressing disapprobation of actions of government without exciting those feelings which generate the inclination to cause public disorder by act of violence would not be penal. In other words, disloyalty to the government established by law is not the same thing as commenting in strong terms about the measures or acts of the government or its agencies so as to ameliorate the condition of people or to secure the cancellation or alteration of those acts or measures by lawful means. That is to say, without exciting those feelings of enmity and disloyalty, which implies excitement to public disorder or use of violence. This judgment, in my view, clearly demarcates what the government is and what the persons controlling the government are. Now let's come down to the other sections which deal with harmony of various groups, class of persons, etc. Section 153(8) provides for, as per its heading, promoting enmity between different groups on grounds of religion, race, place of birth, residence, language, etc., and doing acts prejudicial to the maintenance of harmony. So what it penalizes is, by any act of a person which promotes enmity between different groups on ground of religion, race, and place of birth, and which are prejudicial to maintenance of harmony. If we read it with 153(b), it says imputation, assertion prejudicial to the national integration. Then comes 295(a), which says deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings of any class by insulting its religion or religious beliefs. Then 505 says statements conducing to public mischief. In 295 and 505, the difference is that intent is must. However, in 153(a) and 153(b), intent is not there. As far as the constitutional validity of these sections is concerned, in Sheikh Wajauddin, Allahabad High Court has held the constitutional validity of section 153(a). It is 1963 judgment. AIR 1957 in Ramji Lal Modi, constitutional validity of 295(a) has been upheld. Kedarnath, already dealt, has held the constitutional validity of 505. Now, if we see the analysis and basic difference between these four sections is, in 153(a), it says by words either spoken or written or by signs or by any visible representation or otherwise, then saying, giving the detail, disharmony or feeling of enmity, hatred or ill will between different religious, racial, language or regional groups or caste or communities. Now what 153(b) says, whoever by words either spoken or written or by sign or by visible representation or otherwise makes any imputation that any class of person cannot by reason of their members of any religious, racial, language or regional group or caste or community bear true faith or allegiance to the Constitution of the India. 295(a), which is always dealt along with 153(a), says whoever with deliberate and malicious intention of outraging religious feelings of any class of citizens of India by words either spoken of or written or by signs or by representation insults or attempts to insult the religion or the religious beliefs of that class. Now 505, it says whoever makes, publishes, or circulates any statement, rumor, or report with the intent to cause or likely to cause. First, A deals with Army and Air Force. B deals with general public. It says with the intent to cause or which is likely to cause fear or alarm to the public or any section of the public whereby any person may be induced to commit an offense against the state or against the public tranquility. So 505 is normally read with 124A. 295A, 153A go in together with the difference, wherein one section provides for intent, the other does not. Now, what is to be seen basically over here is that is always the intent, timing, and its effect on the class of persons, communities, or religious groups which matters. There has to be a contemporaneous disharmony or disturbance of public tranquility. If any statement or extortion leads to a communal or any other kind of tension between two communities based on class, religion, or region, then it amounts to commission of offense under these acts. Any statement which may not lead to any such situation may not be good enough to invoke any of the above sections. Here, I'll just mention one of my cases which I had dealt with. It was filed under 153A to 95A. What had happened was there was a news article in one of the newspapers giving the details of the missiles which India had. At that time, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam was heading that department and was known as Missile Man. A letter to editor was received in the newspaper and it got published, wherein it was mentioned that why he, that is Dr. Abdul Kalam, being a community specific person, has targeted all the missiles towards one country of the same community. This led to registration of a case, probably it was in Daryaganj police station. Charge sheet was filed. Printer, publisher, associate editor, and the person who has sent in that letter were listed as an accused. The person who has written the letter was never to be found. The printer, publisher, and the editor appeared. I was representing the editor in that case. Arguments were advanced, and both of them were discharged basically on two grounds. That after the publication of that offending letter to editor, no communal disharmony or riots took place within the vicinity where the newspaper was circulated. And the other aspect, which was a technical aspect, was that the charge sheet was filed without sanction under 196 CRPC. Here I'd like to mention one aspect, that all these four sections, no court can take cognizance unless the sanction from appropriate authority is taken under 196 CRPC. It is not that anybody can go and file a complaint on his own. Registration of FIR, okay. Investigation, okay. But charge sheet can only be filed after the sanction has been taken. Then came in, various judgments came in on these aspects, like Bilal Ahmed Kalu, 97. Then Balwant Singh, 1995, where mens rea was considered as necessary ingredients for offense under 153A. And the distinction was given between 153A and 5052. And what the court held? The main distinction between two offenses is that while publication of words or representation is not necessary under the former, such publication is sine qua non under section 505. The words whoever makes, publishes or circulate and used in setting of section 5052 cannot be interpreted disjunctively, but only as supplementary to each other. If it is construed disjunctively, anyone who makes a statement falling within the meaning of section 505 would, without publication or circulation, be liable to conviction. But the same is the effect with section 153A also, then that section would have been bad for redundancy. The intention of the legislature in providing two different sections on the same subject would have been to cover two different fields of similar color. The fact that both sections were included as package in the same amending enactment lends further support to the said construction. The common feature in both sections being promotion of feeling of enmity, hatred or ill will between different religious or racial or linguistic or regional groups or caste and communities, it is necessary that at least two such groups or communities should be involved. Merely inciting the feeling of one community or group without any reference to any other community or group cannot attract either of the two sections. The result of said discussion is that appellant who has done anything as against any religious, racial or linguistic or regional group of community cannot be held guilty of either offense under 153A or 502. Then there was another judgment of our own Delhi High Court, a full bench judgment. Though it was related to confiscation of offending printing material as permitted under section 95 CRPC. A police can confiscate offending printed material. And the only option available is to go before the Honorable High Court under section 96 CRPC within 2 months of the said order of confiscation. In the case of Safdar Hashmi Trust, full bench of our own High Court has held as under. Under section 153A, the intention of the writer is immaterial, and this section will apply if writing did in fact promote or attempted to promote enmity and hatred, etc. In order to bring the case within 295A, it is not so much the matter of discourse as the manner of it. In other words, the words used should be in such as are bound to be regarded as reasonable man, as grossly offensive and provocative and maliciously and deliberately intended to outrage the feeling of any class of citizens. The grounds of opinion are vital and essential part of notification. Further, it says, one of the basic requirements of section 295 is deliberate and malicious act. Malice is one sense, is negation of bona fides. Then it says, the word maliciously is used in section 219 IPC in order to establish malice. As contemplated by this section, it is not necessary for prosecution to prove that the accused bore ill will or enmity against the specific person. If the injurious act was done voluntarily without a lawful excuse, malice may be presumed. Then it says, section 298 IPC uses the word wounding. Section 295A uses the word outraging. Outraging is much stronger word than wounding. In Murray's dictionary, outrage is explained as a wrong, gross violence or indignity. It further says, Section 153 IPC punishes the act of the act of promoting enmity between different groups or grounds of religion, race, or place of birth, residence, language, caste, community, or any other ground. B, acts prejudicial to the maintenance of harmony between different groups or castes or communities if the acts disturb the public tranquility. The object of Section 153 is to prevent breaches of public tranquility which might result from excited feelings of enmity between class of people. I've already mentioned that aspect. The sanction is required under 196 for all the 4 sections which I have mentioned. Now, after the difference in these sections, lastly, now I would like to touch a very relevant topic which affects an individual also and press equally. That is hate speech. Though a controversial topic, but still a relevant topic. Hate speech means any speech which seeks to delegitimize group members in the eyes of majority, reducing their social standing and acceptance within the society. In 2014, the Honorable Supreme Court in Pravasi Bhalai Sangathan has held hate speech is an effort to marginalize individuals based on their membership in a group using expression that exposes the group to hatred. Hate speech seeks to delegitimize group members in the eyes of majority, reducing their social standing and acceptance within society. Hate speech therefore rises beyond causing distress to individual group members. It can have a societal impact. Hate speech lays the groundwork for later broad attacks on vulnerable that can range from discrimination, etc. Further, it says, Section 153A and 153B make any act which promotes enmity between the groups on ground of religion and race, etc., or which are prejudicial to the national integration, punishable. The purpose of the enactment of such provision was to check vociferous, communal, and separatist tendency and secure fraternity so as to ensure the dignity of individual and unity of nation. The constitutional validity of 295A was upheld in the case of Ramji Lal Modi in 1957 Supreme Court. It was held that provision was only attracted in those aggravated cases where speech was delivered with deliberate and malicious intention to outrage religious feelings of a community. Such speech was likely to lead to public disorder, and therefore the provision as such fell within the permissible restrictions on free speech under 19(2). In a recent judgment, 2017, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, the Honorable Supreme Court has held while dealing with Section 295A that ordinary criticism of a religion would not attract offense under 295A. They go on to say, it penalizes only those acts of insults to those varieties of attempts to insult the religion or religious beliefs of a class of citizens, which are perpetrated with the deliberate and malicious intention of outraging the religious feelings of that class of citizens. Insults to religion offered unwittingly and carelessly without any deliberate or malicious intention to outrage the religious feeling of that class do not come within the section. So the Honorable Supreme Court has really culled out as to what are the requirements for invocation of Section 295A in this judgment. Because of such kind of speeches or offenses happening. Various acts were enacted which have been dealing with spreading hate or outraging feeling amongst class of citizens. I'll just go through them. Under Penal Code, I have already said 124A, 153A, 153B, 295A, 298, 505. Under Representations of People's Act, Section 8, 123, 3A and 125 deal with these aspects. Under Information Technology Act, Section 66A, 69 and 69A. Code of Criminal Procedure, also Section 95, wherein it provides powers to confiscate the material. Then under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, 2F, 10, 11 and 12. Protection of Civil Rights Act, Section 7. Religious Institutions Prevention of Misuse Act, Section 3 and 6. Under Cable Television Network Regulation Act and rules, they provide for program code, advertisement code, and there all these requirements are there as to what should not be telecasted and what should be. Similarly, under Cinematograph Act, Section 4, 5B and 7. So all these acts are specifically, though also on individuals, affect the press and media. The reason being, anybody saying something on any medium either gets printed or telecasted through either newspaper or a social media platform or TV news channel. So therein, it has to be looked into by that press gets involved and becomes liable for action being taken against them. Now, while concluding, I'll just say one thing, two things basically, that it is very incumbent on the persons associated with press and media not to misuse their rights and privileges guaranteed under Constitution or provided through catena of judgments, and to print, publish, report either through print, electronic or digital medium. Facts, they should always do it which are duly verified and truthful in nature, and not to get into cesspool of fake stroke misreported facts and just dish them to people who believe all the words spoken or printed. As lawyers also, we have to be very cautious in informing our clients as to the facts as narrated about an incident do really come within the ambit of commission of offense by any press person or an individual, and they should not indulge in any witch hunting, as such endeavor leads to more acrimony, and the incident, which initially being a minor one, should not be blown to an extent that more harm is caused, not by actual event, but by subsequent events. So I think so this brings to the end my current session, and I leave it on to the moderator. If there are any queries or questions, then we can have them.
If anyone have any question, they can ask sir. I think sir has explained the topic very well in a detailed manner. So any of the audience and the viewers, if have any question, they can just raise it to sir. Sir is ready to answer them.
Yes, I would have one question. My name is Shyam Agarwal. I would like to thank Pawan sir for that extremely informative session. So my question relates to the recent Arnab Goswami controversy. I think we all know the facts. A program was aired on his channel, Republic TV, where he held the Maharashtra government as well as the Congress responsible for not protecting two sadhus who were lynched by a mob in Maharashtra. And apart from making many comments against the Congress, he also tried to maybe communalize the issue and tried to portray that another community had attacked the sadhus. And another situation was where they showed a congregation of many people outside a mosque. And
Shyam, I'll pause you here for a minute. Sir, you are not visible to us.
Yeah, is okay now?
Yes, sir, because live recording is going on, so I request you to remain on it.
So
Yes,
the other
Shyam,
incident, I was saying that the other incident was where there was a congregation of people outside a mosque, and the allegation made by Republic TV was that these people were violating the lockdown restrictions because of their religion, etc. So an attempt was made to defame a particular religious community, but later on it was discovered that those people were not from that religious community. Those people were migrants who were looking for food, etc. So in this sort of situation, now police has added in the FIR section 153A, section 295A. Would you think that these sections are strictly speaking attracted in this case, given the fact that there was no incitement to violence?
You know, Sham, as far as that incident of outside that mosque is concerned, I have not seen the FIR. But I have seen the FIR which is registered as far as that Lagar is concerned, wherein the Nagpur FIR, which is now the basis of investigation as per the orders of the Supreme Court. And if you see that FIR, the contents are very frugal, or a two-liner thing has been mentioned. I'll just read those paragraphs, sorry, those lines. Number one, there's another fact to it. The incident happened on 16th of April. The program was on 21st of April. There is a gap of 6 days. So I don't want to comment on the merits. It is for the investigation, as an ongoing investigation, but these are the facts which we can see from the FIR. And what has been alleged in the complaint by the complainant is, I'll just read it, though it is in Marathi, only few lines are in Hindi. It says, देश में संतों की हत्या हो गई, भारत में 80% हिंदू आबादी है, भारत में हिंदू होना गेरुआ पहनना पाप हो गया है। मैं पूछता हूं, अगर कोई मौलवी और पादरी को मारता तो फिर क्या लोग शांत होते? इटली वाली सोनिया गांधी सो एंड सो चुप नहीं रहती, आज वो चुप हैं, डैश सो एंड सो संतों को मारा गया जबकि उनकी सरकार है। So these are the words which have been mentioned, merely hitting out on one personality. I don't think so. Depending on or reading the FIR, we can see that the contents or the requirements under 153A, 295 are established, but it will all depend on the evidence which comes in. Number two, ultimately, whatever may be the investigation, it has to be seen by the relevant authorities when they give sanction, whether it is a fit case where sanction can be accorded. But if we see all the previous judgments or the law as settled, till any incitement happens, subsequent to that telecast, then only these sections will get attracted. However, if no consequence happened after telecast of this news item, program, I don't think so these sections would be applicable.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
So my name is Priyanshi. I have a
Yeah.
question regarding social media. We've seen a trend coming up where people are using social media platforms to raise their problems and accuse people about, usually sexual harassment or molestation. So my question is, what is the legal status of such accusations, and what are the legal recourse that are available for people to get through this situation?
Like Priyanshi, it's like this. Whenever such kind of things come in social media, if somebody posts some kind of a insinuation or an allegation in social media, it is akin to making a speech or saying something which may get published or printed in any press medium, or whether it is electronic or print. But it is ultimately for the police to investigate, and the person concerned has to go to police and get a case registered for due investigation. If any allegation is put on a social media platform which is harmful to somebody's reputation, or subsequently it is found that it was a fake news, or a person just puts it into the social media platform and doesn't take any legal action, then that person is opening himself or herself for a litigation which may be for defamation or any other provision as permitted under the various laws, whether it is IT Act, IPC, or any other law applicable. Hello. Any other?
Hello,
Any
sir.
other?
Hello, sir. This is Divya.
Yes,
Yeah,
Divya.
Divya.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, Divya, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you for such a wonderful session which you have just given. So I have a question. Is there any time limit for incitement, or it just depends, or a reasonable time?
No, it is always reasonable time. It can't be that today I say something and it is 10 days or 15 days thereafter some incident happens.
Okay.
It has to be, there has to be a reasonable connectivity between the speech or the incident.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I also have one question, sir.
Yeah, Nitesh.
Sir, you have very well explained the time limits, the reasonable times. What I want to ask, sir, if you remember some time back, there was a drive which started Me Too campaign. Sir, in those cases, even some of them got published in the media also. The act which were complained of and which been speeched of in the media, so there was a huge time gap in both of them. So, sir, how do you explain that, and how do you throw light on that, sir? Because that does not come within the ambit of reasonable time.
No, I'll tell you. What had happened was what came into Me Too and all those allegations were under those offenses where there is no limitation provided. So thereby meaning anything said at any time. Then it will be for the trial court to say the reasonable time. But all these sections which we are dealing today, whether it is incitement or disharmony, there has to be a reasonable time issue. Similarly to what you see, what the courts have held in suicide matters, it is akin to that only, that there has to be a reasonable connection.
So then, sir, we leave it on the court's wisdom to decide that whether it was a reasonable within the reasonable time or not.
Yeah, because what happens in those kind of allegations which were part of Me Too, then it will be for the complainant to prove the case. Though there is no limitation, but ultimately, what happens is we are more concerned about getting a case registered as a complainant. And nowadays, a situation has come in where all accused want that their case should be quashed immediately. Nobody looks into the aspect that let investigation happen and let trial happen. no court can look into any evidence at the stage of quashing in such kind of matters. And we lose our focus from the actual result which should have come or should come in such kind of cases.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Sorry, though people get what you call media glare initially, but later on it has to be seen as to what is the outcome of the case.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining the same. Any other question? If anyone has, they may raise it. Else, I will be concluding with the webinar. Sir, thank you so much on behalf of Lecture Series on Law. And sir, you have thrown the wonderful light on the subject on which you have spoken. I think none of the books can throw such a detailed light on the subject we have just spoken, and we have all been guided by the same. So thank you for your time and for the wonderful lecture.
Welcome.
Thanks a lot,
And
sir.
thanks everybody for
Thank you, sir.
Thanks everybody for listening to me on this topic, which being such a technical issue, you have to go through all those technical pattern which is there in various judgments and mentioned in those sections to understand the requirements. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir.